We have changed to an hour long. So that's going to be a lot more fun. You get to see a little more of the background and the fun little hijinks that we have in between. And we went to an estate sale for one of the episodes.
Most people who recognize Brandi Passani know her as the sharp-tongued blonde from Storage Wars, the woman who could walk into a dusty auction, size up an abandoned unit in seconds, and walk away with something worth far more than anyone else thought to bid. For years, viewers watched her hold her own against some of the loudest and most experienced buyers in the business, trading quick remarks, taking calculated risks, and making it clear that she belonged in a world that wasn't particularly welcoming to newcomers. But the story that unfolded behind the cameras is considerably more compelling than anything audiences ever saw on television. It is a story about struggle, heartbreak, stubborn determination, and a woman who refused to let her circumstances write her future. Long before any television producer knew her name, Brandi was simply a young woman trying to find her footing in a world that wasn't making things easy. She grew up in Texas, and by her own description, her childhood was chaotic and far from comfortable. There was no privilege to fall back on, no obvious path forward, and no one handing her a plan. What those early years gave her instead was resilience. She learned at a young age how to absorb difficulty without crumbling under it, and that ability to keep moving when things got hard became one of the most defining qualities she would carry into every chapter of her adult life. She was never naturally outgoing by her own account. She kept her guard up around people she didn't know, having learned through experience that trust was something to be earned rather than given freely. Beneath that caution was someone with real ambition and a clear sense that she wanted something better, both for herself and for the family she hoped to build someday. As she moved into adulthood, financial pressure became a constant reality. She took whatever work she could find: babysitting, waitressing, cleaning, and a range of other jobs that paid modestly but kept her moving forward. None of it was glamorous, and none of it offered any sense of permanence. But every one of those jobs taught her something about the value of showing up and doing the work even when the reward wasn't obvious. When she became a mother, the stakes shifted. The decisions she made were no longer just about her own survival. They were about providing stability for her children, and that responsibility pushed her harder than anything else could have. The meeting that would eventually change the direction of her life happened while she was working as a carpet cleaning assistant in California. Schultz was in management at the same company, and by the accounts they later shared, their early interactions were not especially promising. There was friction, awkward moments, and plenty of personality clashes. Over time, though, that friction gave way to something more meaningful, and what started as workplace banter slowly became a genuine relationship. Neither of them had any idea where it would eventually lead. Together they faced the kind of everyday pressures that most ordinary couples know well: financial uncertainty, career instability, and the ongoing challenge of raising a family without a safety net. Like many people trying to stretch limited resources, they eventually stumbled across the world of storage unit auctions, a business that operates on the principle that someone else's abandoned belongings might contain something worth real money. The appeal was obvious even if the odds were uncertain. You paid to open a unit you couldn't fully inspect in advance, sorted through whatever was inside, and hoped the contents were worth more than what you spent. It was risky and unpredictable, and success was never guaranteed. But when financial options are limited, risk starts looking like opportunity, and that's exactly how Brandi and Jared approached it. They began attending auctions regularly, purchasing units, hauling everything back, sorting through it all, and selling whatever they could. The work was exhausting and the returns were inconsistent, but they kept going. Eventually, they turned that hustle into something more structured by opening their own thrift store called Now and Then in Orange County. The store became the center of their daily lives, requiring long hours of buying, pricing, hauling, and selling while managing all the unpredictability that comes with running a small business. Success didn't arrive quickly. There were periods when failure seemed more realistic than progress. What they couldn't have known was that someone outside their world was paying close attention. Television producers who were developing a show around the storage auction circuit had noticed Jared first. But when they met Brandi, something about her immediately stood out. She had an authenticity that tends to register strongly on camera. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to project an image or play a role. She was simply exactly who she was, and that quality is harder to find than most people realize. When Storage Wars launched, it caught audiences almost immediately. The format combined competition, suspense, humor, and the genuine possibility of discovering something valuable, and viewers found it irresistible. Brandi and Jared came into the show as outsiders. They were newer to the auction world than most of the other buyers, with less experience and fewer connections. Plenty of the more established competitors saw them as easy to dismiss. What those competitors didn't account for was how the viewing public would respond. Audiences connected with Brandi and Jared precisely because they came across as real people navigating a competitive environment through hard work rather than insider knowledge. Their on-screen dynamic, which included plenty of good-natured argument and well-timed sarcasm, felt genuine because it was genuine. Viewers could tell the difference. Brandi quickly became one of the breakout personalities of the show. Her quick wit, her willingness to speak her mind, and her complete lack of interest in being intimidated by louder or more experienced buyers gave her a screen presence that was difficult to ignore. When she thought something was overpriced, she said so. When she disagreed with a decision, she made her position clear. When the situation became tense or frustrating, her humor tended to cut right through it. Fans responded to all of it enthusiastically. One of the moments that helped cement her reputation came when she and Jared took a risk on a storage unit that most other buyers had largely passed over. The contents didn't look particularly promising on the surface, but inside they found a substantial collection of vintage silver coins that turned out to be worth significantly more than their initial investment. Moments like that one illustrated both their growing instinct for the business and their willingness to trust their own judgment rather than follow the crowd. As the show's popularity grew, so did the scope of what fame brought with it. Millions of viewers recognized her face. Social media followings expanded. Interview requests arrived regularly. Public appearances became part of her routine. The woman who had once worked multiple low-paying jobs just to cover her bills was now a recognized television personality with a nationwide audience. But the attention came with complications she hadn't fully anticipated. Not all of it was supportive or even benign. The internet created a new kind of pressure, one where strangers felt entitled to comment on her appearance, speculate about her relationships, and spread rumors that had no basis in fact. For someone who had spent years keeping a relatively guarded personal life, the level of public intrusion that came with fame was genuinely difficult to adjust to. She worked to protect her children from the spotlight even as her own profile continued to rise, becoming more deliberate about what she shared publicly as she grew more aware of what unchecked attention could cost. While the external pressures were real, the more significant challenge was developing quietly at home. Brandi and Jared had built a life together over nearly 2 decades. They had raised children together, operated businesses together, and become recognizable as a pair to millions of viewers. Their banter had become one of the most recognizable elements of the show's dynamic. But what audiences saw in those edited television moments couldn't capture the full complexity of a long-term relationship experiencing real strain. The pressures of fame, the demands of their business, the responsibilities of parenting, and the ways in which people grow and change over time had gradually created distance between them. When the news of their separation eventually became public, it caught many fans off guard. For viewers who had watched them together for years, the announcement felt sudden and difficult to absorb. For Brandi and Jared, it had been a long time coming. She handled the situation with a level of quiet dignity that stood in contrast to how many high-profile relationships end in the age of social media. There were no public accusations, no drawn-out interviews dissecting what had gone wrong, no campaign to shape how the story was told. She simply focused on what came next. Rebuilding after a relationship that had lasted the better part of 20 years meant addressing both practical and emotional challenges simultaneously, all while keeping her children's well-being at the center of every decision. Many people who watched her assumed the breakup would knock her down. Instead, it appeared to push her forward. The transformation became visible to her audience gradually and then all at once. Her social media presence shifted in a way that was hard to miss. The posts she shared projected a confidence and energy that felt different from before, and fans noticed. Comments poured in from people who described seeing a version of her that seemed freer and more fully herself than the one they'd known during her years with Jared. At a point in life when many women feel pressure to shrink or stay quiet, Brandi seemed to be doing the opposite. She wasn't chasing trends or trying to compete with anyone. She was simply inhabiting her own life more completely than she had in a long time, and the response from her audience was immediate and enthusiastic. What people were really reacting to wasn't the surface-level changes they could see. It was the resilience underneath, the evidence of someone who had been through something genuinely hard and chosen to come out the other side with her sense of self intact. The show went through its own period of disruption during the COVID-19 pandemic, with production halted like so much of the entertainment industry during that period. For Brandi, the pause created space to reflect and reorient. When filming resumed, viewers observed another shift in her presence. She seemed more settled in herself, more certain of where she stood and where she was headed. She was also open, at least in hints and glimpses, to the idea of finding happiness in a new relationship, and eventually a new chapter in her personal life became visible through what she chose to share. Fans who had followed her story closely were glad to see it. One of the clearest signs of her evolution came through a decision to launch her own podcast, which she titled The Real Reality. The name itself was a kind of statement, a direct acknowledgement that what audiences had watched on television over the years was never the complete picture. The podcast gave her a platform to speak in her own words about the experiences behind the public image, including conversations about fame, relationships, personal growth, and the gap between how lives are presented on screen and how they're actually lived. It was a meaningful step because it represented something more than a new project. It represented ownership, specifically ownership of her own voice and her own story, on her own terms. That instinct toward ownership has defined Brandi's journey from the beginning, even before she had the platform to exercise it this openly. Every difficult period in her life, from a challenging childhood in Texas to financial instability to the pressures of public scrutiny to the pain of a long relationship ending, has ultimately produced the same response. She found a way to keep going. Not dramatically or loudly, but steadily, which is often the more impressive version of perseverance. The storage auctions gave her a television career. The television career gave her visibility. But the quality that has kept people interested in her story long after many reality television personalities have faded from public memory isn't the career. It's the consistency of her character across circumstances that would have derailed a less grounded person. She remained recognizably herself through all of it, and audiences have rewarded that consistency with genuine, lasting loyalty. What makes Brandi Passani's story resonate beyond the entertainment industry is that it doesn't follow a tidy arc of overnight success or fairy tale rescue. It follows the messier, more honest pattern of someone who kept making the best decision available to her in each difficult moment, accumulated enough of those decisions over enough years, and ended up somewhere considerably better than where she started. The auctions may have opened the door, but it was everything she brought to that door long before any camera was pointed at her that determined what happened next. Her story is still being written, and if the chapters that have already been completed are any indication, the ones ahead are likely to be just as compelling.